Chapter 46. With Jacob, Ed, and Woodstock in tow, we collectively meandered over to the break room, where Temp was having a rather loud and animated conversation with Ajax. "You should have seen his face," Ajax said. Unlike the last time I saw him, Ajax wasn't wearing his fursuit, and instead was sporting a pair of leather pants, white Doc Martens, and a white crop top with a picture of a possum that said "Too pretty for a job" in hot pink letters. He looked terrible, darling, the Tribune said. Bloody, bruised, and covered in dirt. He was so mad, I legitimately thought he was going to have an aneurysm. And the best part is, he's a bleeding support among the other room keepers. It seems like none of them want to get on your new boyfriend's bad side. And speaking of the devil, the fox furry fixed me with a sly, vulpine smile. "Hello, Daniel." "Ajax," I replied with a nod, ignoring his new boyfriend comment. Although I liked Temperance as a friend and trusted her with my life, I wasn't at all attracted to her. She was pretty enough, but she was also fucking crazy, and I'd learned during my Marine Corps days that it wasn't wise to dip your fishing pole into crazy. "You guys talking about Jackson?" I asked, figuring that was the most likely target of their gossip. "Who else?" Ajax replied, cocking an eyebrow. "That stunt you pulled? Banishing him from the store in front of all his bootlicking followers. Absolutely delicious. He ended up on the 5th floor and it took him 3 days to make it back to the hold. Honestly, it was the most peaceful the hold has been in ages." He was, understandably, incensed with rage. Frothing at the mouth like the uncouth and utterly stupid animal he is. The man tossed his head back and cackled. "Naturally, he tried to smash his way back into your lovely establishment," Ajax finally continued when his crowing subsided, but once he realized he'd been perma-banned, he stormed off in a fit of rage. "I suspect he's in danger of losing his seat on the tribunal, which would be a tremendous relief for everyone with even a shred of common sense." Still, Ajax fixed me with a level stare. "I'd be wary of him, were I you, Daniel. Jackson is angry that you embarrassed him, but I think he's also scared. In my experience, scared animals tend to lash out in inconvenient ways." Ajax paused and traced his bottom lip with one nail. "And perhaps he has every right to be scared," he said, appraising me with fresh eyes. "Level 35? The Howler shook his head ruefully. My, but you've been a busy boy, haven't you? You've gone up 12 levels since the last time we spoke. You've also made some interesting and dangerous new acquaintances." Ajax shifted his green gaze to Ed, who'd slunk into the room behind me. "You haven't introduced me to your new friend." "I'm Ajax," he said, directing the comment toward Ed, Tribune of Howler's Hold, proprietor of the Muslin Mast, and close personal confidant with Daniel, here. Ed squirmed a little under Ajax's intense scrutiny. "Close personal confidant might be a bit much," I said to ease some of the discomfort in the air. "Pish-posh," Ajax replied, brushing away my words. "In backrooms terms, we're practically family at this point. Now, are you going to introduce me to your friend or not?" I sighed. "Yeah, sorry. Ajax, this is Ed. He's a delver from the 24th floor. Be gentle with him, okay? He hasn't seen people in close to a decade, so don't overwhelm him with your bullshit." "You insult me," Ajax said, sounding aghast at the very implication. "I would never. I've been told more than once that I am extremely subtle." I snorted and rolled my eyes. "I barely know you, but I'd say you have all the subtlety of a brick to the face. Honestly, I think I might have picked up the perfect new relic for you," I added, thinking about the brick toss relic. Ajax pouted and promptly looked away from me. "Ignore this savage," he said to Ed, patiently ignoring me. "I like your bird by the way, he's lovely." "It's a she, actually," Ed grunted, still sounding a little unsure. "Her name's Woodstock and she's been with me a long time. She's a good girl." "Woodstock," the parrot cooed. "Woodstock, best girl. Woodstock kill you with fire." "What a delightful and charming creature," Ajax said, clapping gleefully, apparently not at all worried that the bird had just threatened to murder him with fire. Now that I thought about it, Woodstock and Ajax had very similar energy. I'd love to hear more about the 24th floor. Rafe told me a few stories about it, but he spent so little time there and Jacob refused to tell me anything about it at all. Once upon a time, I wanted to go down to 25 so I could make the leap and do the whole transmog thing, but then I got cold feet. That's probably for the best, Ed said, dropping into a vacant chair, opposite Ajax. The 24th floor is a toxic waste dump. It's a miracle that anyone makes it off the floor alive. Why didn't you leave? Ajax asked, sounding genuinely curious. Surely there must be a way for someone as strong as you? It sounded like a simple, innocent question, but I could tell Ajax was probing for insight. Maybe working some angle, though one I didn't fully grasp. Ed paused for a long moment, the silence heavy with unspoken words. I couldn't leave until I finished my mission, he said eventually. I know about a few stairwells that lead down to the research labs on 25. Even guided a few delvers that way. Truth is, I could have used them any time. But I made promises to some folks who, well, they're not here anymore. And I'm a man of my word. Always have been. Before Ajax could ask Ed anymore, Croc blundered into the room with a giant grin on its rubbery blue face. Dan. You'll never guess what happened. It's unbelievable. Did Princess Ponypuff finally say something nice to you? I asked. I said unbelievable, not impossible, Croc replied without missing a beat. I finally hit level 25 and I officially evolved, Dan. I'm no longer a juvenile. The mimic puffed its chest out in pride. I'm officially an adolescent, and that's not all. Instead of being just a regular old, run-of-the-mill polymorphic mimic, I'm now a true transmorphic mimic. Just examine me, you'll see, the dog said, its blue tail wiggling like crazy. As requested, I focused on Croc and willed my researcher's codex to activate. Dweller 0.3725A, adolescent true transmorphic mimic outcast, level 25, congratulations, your mimic has finally hit its awkward teenage phase, except instead of pimples and angst, it's got the bite force of a saltwater croc and plans for world domination. The adolescent true transmorphic represents a truly terrifying leap in the evolutionary life cycle of any mimic. This thing is no longer a mindless, hungry murder machine. It is now a self-aware, hungry murder machine with the emotional maturity of a middle schooler, which should fucking terrify you. Unlike its younger, monomorphic kin, this mimic also isn't stuck pretending to be wood while feeling distinctly squishy and organic. As a true transmorphic mimic, it can genuinely become metal, stone, or any other material it chooses, though it still struggles with complex mechanical parts or advanced living organisms. Don't let that fool you, though. Let your guard down for even a minute and you'll find yourself bleeding out on the floor while an angry coffee table devours your intestines. Good rule of thumb? Don't trust anything. Not a drinking fountain. Not that ladder. Not that chair. Chances are, they are all mimics. Hell, you might already be sitting on it. When I closed out of the description, Croc was gone and in its place was a plastic folding chair, just like all the other ones positioned around the break room table. Unlike Croc's previous piss-poor attempts at mimicry, I genuinely couldn't tell which chair was Croc. Holy shit, that's a pretty good disguise, I said, prodding the chair in front of me with my boot. I was shocked when one of the chairs around the break room table manifested googly eyes then started talking. Can you even believe it, Dan? The chair asked before blurring and taking the shape of a dog. Though this time, Croc wasn't blue or rubber. Instead, the mimic looked more or less like an actual golden retriever, though there were still some obvious anatomical discrepancies. Its legs were disproportionate and a little too long, giving the lab a distinctly hyena feel, and it still had the butteriest of all butterfaces with beady black dots for eyes. Despite that, the upgrade was impressive. I dropped down onto one knee and ran my hand along Croc's back, noting that the texture of the fur was damn near perfect. Croc felt like a real dog. Well, this is absolutely horrifying, and I am entirely here for it, Ajax said, sounding thrilled. That's not all, either, the dog said, swelling up and outward, transforming into a large slightly distorted grizzly with teeth and claws made of gleaming, razor-sharp steel. Grizzly scissor hands. Then Croc raised one arm and the whole limb turned into a huge steel mace head covered in inch-long spikes. I can turn my whole body into metal if I want to. Croc shifted again, this time transforming into an enormous metal cross, which I immediately recognized as a Czech hedgehog, the metal barriers the Germans had used to deter beach incursions during World War II. Though, admittedly, this one had a pair of oversized googly eyes, each as big as my fist. Just imagine all the cool things I can do now, Dan. I mean, I still can't make very good people yet, but who knows, maybe that'll happen with my next evolution? The spiked cross of black and steel turned into a pale and completely bald human who didn't seem to have any bones. Almost like a realistic, flesh-colored Gumby doll. "Oh my god, that's the worst one yet," Ajax said in approval. "Once again, I love it." "Thanks," the mimic said, without seeming to realize that Ajax was being sarcastic. "I've been working really hard on it. But that's not even the coolest part. I've finally unlocked a ranged attack, called Charnel Feeder." Croc, still in androgynous human form, unhinged its jaw and projectile vomited a dark red slug which sailed across the room and smacked into the far wall with a wet thwop. The slug, easily as long as my forearm, dropped to the floor and began to wriggle across the linoleum, leaving behind a viscous trail as it mechanically worked a pair of snapping mandibles. "That right there's a flesh maw," Croc said, beaming at the bulbous creature. "It's like a little baby me. Isn't it just adorable?" "It's less disgusting than Mr. Wiggles," Ed said, which was technically true, even though that was a pretty low bar to hurdle. "Kill it with fire," Woodstock added, eyeing the slug with deep and obvious suspicion. "My thoughts exactly," Temperance agreed, scooting a little further away from the conjured creature. "Be nice," I growled, feeling strangely protective of my dog. I mean, objectively, the slug was even more revolting than Croc's human form. But then again all of the abilities in the back rooms were equally revolting. I paused, lips pressed into a thin line. Okay, maybe they weren't all quite as horrifying as that monstrosity wiggling across the floor, but it was certainly no grosser than Temp's ball of dire mosquitoes or my taxidermid horrors. And Ed really had no room to talk, considering he had 6 eyes and a lamprey mouth hole beneath his illusionary mask. "I think it's awesome, Croc," I said, which wasn't totally a lie. Only mostly a lie. I mean, it was useful, which was awesome. Though, now that I thought about it, I wasn't actually sure what the slug did. What exactly does it do?" I asked. "Other than crawl around, I mean?" "It eats, Dan," Croc replied, so though that should have been obvious, and it's really good at burrowing. Mostly into flesh. It'll hang around, just eating corpses or munching on bad guys for 10 minutes, and it gets bigger and bigger as it eats. And the bigger it gets, the more damage it deals, which is pretty neat. Then at the end of its short life cycle it either explodes, dealing 50% of all the damage it's already dealt, or I can reabsorb it, healing me for the same amount instead. If it happens to be burrowed inside someone when it explodes, all the damage is multiplied by 3. "Actually, I've changed my mind," Temperance amended. "I very much like this slug creature and cannot wait to see it explode whilst lodged inside someone's throat." "Oh, Temp. You are so utterly broken, sweetie," Ajax said, patting the woman affectionately on the hand. "Right now, I can only summon one of the little buggers," Croc continued, "but eventually, as the skill ranks up, I'll be able to summon a bunch of them." I agree with Temperance. "That is quite the impressive ability," Jacob said, his face stoic and unreadable. "You should be very proud." "I've never been prouder, honestly," Croc said, shifting back into blue dog form. "I'm basically a parent now, if you think about it. It's like when Bella finally had Reensme in Breaking Dawn. This little fella is my Reensme, which I think we can all agree is a lovely and perfectly normal name for a human child. And speaking of names, I've been thinking about naming him. Feels like my child should really have a name, just like Drumbo or Cynthia or Baby Hands. What do you think of Remy? Has a nice ring to it, Don't you think so? Have you considered something more thematically appropriate like Nulzathar the Crimson Glutton or Gorafang the Ever-Hungering? Ajax offered. You know, something Lovecraft would approve of. Remy is a great name, I said, glaring at Ajax. Isn't it, Ajax? And before you answer, remember what happened to Jackson, I said, though I softened the words, so he knew I was joking. Such a tease, Ajax replied, rolling his eyes. Of course, Remy is a fine name. I knew a Remy, once. A big strong man with arms like Christmas hams and a mustache you wouldn't believe. I raised one hand to stop him. As interesting as that sounds, I said, sadly we have places to be, so you'll just have to save that for another day. Or maybe, just never tell that story to anyone ever, for any reason. Honestly, I would rather battle 1,000 toddler spiders than hear another word about Remy the Mustache Man. Some things were worse than death. Oh, and where are you off to in such a hurry? Ajax asked. We're going house hunting. Chapter 47. We stepped out of the elevator and into the cramped cement stairwell of the Sunnyside Tiny Tots preschool facility. Harsh lighting buzzed overhead, and after spending a couple of hours away, the tight confines of the walls felt claustrophobic, while the oppressive atmosphere of the floor itself seemed to press down on me like a giant hand. It hadn't been 24 hours yet, so I couldn't remove the door plate, not that I wanted to. Not if there was even a slim possibility that Mr. Wiggles might be on the other. The stairwell terminated at another steel door, simply labeled exit, which wasn't so different from the one we'd entered through, though, notably, this one had a rectangular plexiglass window that gave us a glimpse at what lay beyond. The sub-basement was dark and dimly lit, but it looked to be some sort of overflow storage area, and when I consulted my mini-map I didn't see any red blips or signs of obvious danger. Not like with the preschool above. Here goes nothing. I pressed the metal release bar, and the door popped open with a loud groan that echoed ominously through the cramped confines of the stairwell. Even though I knew that physical strength was my weakest ability by a long shot, I still pulled my hammer free and clutched it tight. Don't get me wrong, magic was fucking awesome, but there was just something deeply comforting about having a weapon in one hand, ready to brain anything that jumped out at me. Unlike the preschool with its squishy floors and oddly organic walls and fixtures, the rectangular room was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. Just a run-down storage basement. Drab gray concrete, questionable lighting, and huge metal shelving units covered with janitorial supplies along with a heap of other miscellaneous bullshit. A heavy coating of dust lined those shelves and cobwebs clung to the corners, though, whatever spiders lived down here appeared to be of the mundane variety and not of the giant, toddler face sort. There wasn't any sign of life, and my spelunker's sixth sense remained quiet, which was a blessed relief after everything we'd been through so far. It looked as though it had been right after all. This place really was the vestigial remains of some long-forgotten time before the Hoa had ruled this level with an iron fist. I pulled out my Moglite and splashed the cone of yellow light over the assorted items decorating the nearest set of shelves. Although there were several plastic bins filled to overflowing with basic maintenance equipment or various janitorial cleaning supplies, most of the stuff appeared to be leftover garage sale items. There were even a few weathered and creased yard signs, leaning up against one wall advertising a community neighbor yard sale. "My God," Jackin exclaimed, while picking up a porcelain Hummel doll from a nearby shelf. Well, maybe not an actual Hummel, since the figurine in the Sendel's hand appeared to be a little boy impaled by a white picket fence with bloody tears running down his face. "This is a relic. Cursed keepsake," he said. "It is not so different from the Doodle Buddy relics we found down on the 7th floor, though significantly more powerful." He tossed it to me with a flick of his wrist and I snagged it effortlessly with a strand of telekinetic power. Holy shit, he was right. The creepy figurine allowed the user to summon a 3-foot-tall, level 15, Victorian-era murder doll. Like Chucky but made of porcelain and brimming with infectious tuberculosis. Literally. Spreading tuberculosis was its main attack. The summoned minion had a 20-minute shelf life and then would crumble into a fine powder once the timer elapsed. I carefully handed the relic back to Jacob, then turned to regard the remaining items. Most of the items were just useless, pro-generated bullshit, but there were several more relics and a couple of decent artifacts mixed in with the rest of the refuse. An uncommon artifact in the form of a clunky, retro soda fountain dispenser conjured a never-ending supply of old-timey sodas like sarsaparilla, root beer, cream soda, and cherry phosphate. Though I was entirely sure what cherry phosphate was. The drinks all offered mild buffs, plus 1% movement speed for 10 minutes or a -1 second cooldown on relic abilities for 5 minutes, and though I didn't really need a soda dispenser, I figured it would make a nice addition to the concession stand. Into my storage space it went. An uncommon relic, called static TV projection, let the user project a very simple illusion. The catch was the illusion would be in black and white and subtly distorted with static. Nowhere near as powerful as some of the other illusion-based relics we'd come across, but it could still serve as a decent distraction under the right circumstances. There was almost a dozen more relics and artifacts like that. Greaser's Grit, minorly boosted toughness and athleticism. And aura called Pin-Up Power, temporarily increased the self-esteem of any female ally in the area of effect. Rockabilly Rollout was a stamina-based charge skill, not so different from Jacob's Cowcatcher ability. Most had limited functionality, at least for delvers at our power level, but there were two particularly interesting items that caught my eye. The first was Atomic Age Timmy Burst, a rare great relic that resembled a 1950s Starburst wall clock, garish and gold and extremely retro. With it, the user could create a time pocket, capable of either slowing down time or speeding it up for all of a single second. In the grand scheme of things, 1 second wasn't enough time to do, well, damn near anything. Plus, the time pocket was tiny, only 12 inches by 12 inches. In its current form, the relic wasn't particularly useful, but it was the first legitimate time-based relic I'd ever come across. That alone made it an invaluable discovery, and I was sure that with a little patience, I could forge it into something much, much better. I was also sure that I could find a way to use it with Runic Resonance Trap to start manufacturing time-based traps and spell cards. The second item of note was a bowling ball, covered in swirls of blues and greens and purples, with a human skull embedded in the center of the prismatic resin. Bowling ball of rolling momentum. Rare artifact. Type, kinetic amplifier. Once this humble bowling ball starts rolling, it's like a snowball from hell, absorbing kinetic energy and growing deadlier with every second it's in motion. What starts as a tiny nudge quickly escalates into a rampaging wrecking ball of doom, capable of turning even the sturdiest foe into a smear on the pavement. Forget finesse, this baby's all about momentum. Just give it a shove and let physics do the dirty work. The bowling ball of rolling momentum deals 20 points of base bludgeoning damage. For every additional second the ball stays in motion, however, its damage increases by 10%, until it reaches its max kinetic velocity 1000% of initial base damage, for a total of 220 points of bludgeoning damage. Be sure to aim wisely, because this thing is like a freight train, and once it's in motion, there's just no stopping it. The bowling ball wasn't an ideal weapon for most people. It was cumbersome, unwieldy, and even though it built kinetic force over time, the ball would have to be rolling for over 25 seconds to hit its max velocity. Which made it a neat trinket with little actual combat utility. I wasn't most people, however. Using psychic sovereignty, I could telepathically get the ball rolling and then just let it orbit around me, building more and more momentum with each pass, effectively transforming the bowling ball into a single-shot artillery cannon. And thanks to my Weapon of Opportunity title, the damage increased by an additional 5%. True, an extra 5% wasn't much, but every little bit counted, and at max velocity, I was confident the bowling ball would punch a hole through a brick wall. Even better than the cast-off, garage sale relics and artifacts, was what Temperance found in a nearby adjoining room. "Good Lord," she said, her voice bouncing off the concrete walls, "you need to come see this." A single hallway snaked away from the main storage room, which would theoretically take us directly to the sub-basement of the community radio station. But protruding off from that hallway was a secondary storage room, which was even dustier and more run down than the first. The room was dark, but I found a light switch on the wall, and when I thumbed it on, overhead lights weakly buzzed to life. The room was filled with a variety of bulky shapes all draped in white drop clothes, like the kind I used for painting. Even covered as they were, however, I could tell a pinball machine when I saw one. And not just pinball machines. I saw several pool tables and the lever of what appeared to be an antique slot machine peeking out from beneath another canvas tarp. "What the hell is this?" I asked, shooting a questioning glance at Temp. "Unless my eyes deceive me," she said, sounding extremely smug, "I believe this is the remnants of an old loot arcade." My mouth went dry at the mere thought. I'd accumulated some powerful loot arcade tokens and I'd been meaning to pay the Jungle Gym Jamboree a visit for weeks, but just hadn't been able to make the time. I'd briefly stopped by an arcade down on the 3rd floor, but the place had been bristling with arcade specters and not one but two mobile murder munchers, floating, nearly indestructible, Pac-Man-esque nightmares. "I know we've got places to be, but we can't pass up an opportunity like this," I said, venturing deeper into the room. "Let's get these things uncovered." Working together, it only took us a few minutes to remove the assortment of drop clothes and reveal the hall in all its glory. Temperance had been right on the money. Although this room wasn't a loot arcade in the traditional sense of the word, it was obvious these machines had all come from a loot arcade at some point. Though how they'd ended up in a derelict sub-basement beneath the preschool was anyone's guess. Ed reverently ran a shaky hand along the top of a vintage, alien invasion-themed pinball machine with the words Astro Raiders splashed across the back. "I haven't seen one of these in probably 30 years, he said, the ghost of a smile on his gaunt face. Back before the Bolaramas moved in and the Hoa took over, the loot arcades on this floor used to look like 1950s pool halls. The kind of places my dad would take me as a kid. He worked in a steel mill, my dad," Ed said, glancing up at me. "Heavy drinker," he reminisced, "and not much of a talker. But every Friday he'd take me to the smoky pool joint just outside of Gary, Indiana. Terrible place, especially for an 8-year-old, not that I realized any of that at the time. To me it was just fun. I'd spend hours playing pinball while he drank beer and traded war stories with his VFW buddies. I half listened to the story while I perused the rest of the abandoned equipment. On top of pinball machines, there was also an entire row of slot machines, though these weren't the newfangled slots with LED screens and blinking lights. These were hulking contraptions of wood and metal with a long lever sticking out like a chrome arm. Sitting beside them was a vintage horse racing machine that allowed users to gamble loot tokens on miniature mechanical horses. There were also other, older arcade games that I was only marginally familiar with, like Strength Tester, the Love-O-Matic, and even an off-brand fortune-telling contraption called Mystic Morty. Instead of the temporary tattoo or the gashapon machines I was accustomed to seeing, they had coin-operated Winston cigarette dispensers and several 50s-styled gumball machines with metallic coin plates that corresponded to the different loot token types. Copper and silver, gold, and even rarer colors like ruby or diamond. Inside of each of the glass-topped bubbles were plastic toy capsules filled with potentially powerful items. A nearby token-operated jukebox allowed you to select from a variety of songs that would grant temporary buffs to up to 5 listeners. Great Balls of Fire, by the eminently talented Jerry Lee Lewis, increased all fire-based damage dealt by 8% for 8 hours, while Why Do Fools Fall in Love randomly buffed one stat by 3% for 5 hours. One of my favorites, though, was Yakety Yak by the Coasters, which increased the effectiveness of all mind control and fear-based spells for 2 hours. The strength of the buff and its overall duration could also be increased by spending more powerful loot tokens in the jukebox. Because there were no dwellers anywhere in the immediate vicinity, I could annex the entire room and tack it onto the store without any obvious repercussions. Having our own loot arcade, even if it was a small outdated one, would be an enormous value add for the store. Before I did that, however, I intended to pick up a few items for myself in preparation for our inevitable showdown with the Hoa. especially because I had a metric-ass load of tokens burning a hole in my pocket. Coppers were the most common, but those were only redeemable for the most basic bitch items, stuff I already had plentiful access to like food, water, or non-magical survival gear. The silvers were a little better and would typically earn a common grade artifact with an empty effect slot or decent one-offs. I cashed in a tube sock full of silver delver tokens, earning a bunch of random items, a pack of enchanted matches that would light under any circumstances, a canteen that purified water, a goldfish in a bag. Eating it granted the ability to breathe underwater for an hour. A silver acrobatics token bought me one of those green plastic parachute figurines, the kind I'd tossed off the roof of my house as a kid. Their little parachutes would unfurl as they fell and then they'd meander and drift down to the grassy expanse of the front lawn. Unless, of course, an errant breeze picked up, and then the parachute man was just as likely to end up hopelessly mired in the neighbor's rose bushes. The parachute man was a one-time use artifact. When activated, it allowed the user to float gently and safely to the ground instead of splattering like an overripe tomato. I had 3 gold tokens, Septic, Outlaw, and Trapsmith, though my 2 big prizes were the Sapphire Binder token I'd earned from killing Funtime Frank and the Ruby Slayer token, which had come as a reward for the Toddler Mimic Massacre. When I popped the lid off the Golden Slayer capsule, a pulsing green stone with a silver rune carved into its face tumbled into my palm. A sigil stone. Those could be affixed to any appropriate artifact with an empty effect slot, granting the item a permanent upgrade. This particular sigil was called Stench Cloak, and even though it was decent on paper, it was terrible in practice. When activated, it unleashed an aura that reduced enemy accuracy by 25% while within the area of effect. Stench Cloak accomplished that truly remarkable feat by exuding a rancid aura so unspeakably foul that attackers couldn't properly focus because they would be too busy projectile vomiting from the stench. Problem was, friendlies were just as likely to be affected by the aura, and equipping it would also make me perpetually reek like an old jockstrap. I didn't have a lot of standards, not anymore, but not smelling like ball cheese was among them. My Trapsmith token earned me an upgraded Journeyman's Pry Bar. It expanded my ability to dissect and disarm a wider range of traps and, best of all, let me overlay 2 compatible spell effects when crafting runic traps. If I managed to get my hands on a master-level Pry Bar, I had the sneaking suspicion that I'd be able to create more lasting effects or even, potentially, start crafting my own sigil stones. The Golden Outlaw token, though not nearly as good a prize as my new Pry Bar, was a significant step up from the Stench Cloak. It was a one-off elixir called the Potion of YOLO - you only live once. Unless you don't, which quadrupled every single stat for 4 minutes. According to the flavor text, the elixir was perfect for when you need to punch God right in the fucking mouth. The caveat was that after the timer elapsed, every stat was reduced by quadruple for 1 hour and you promptly fell unconscious for 20 minutes. It was a real, win the day or die instantly kind of thing. My 2 rare tokens, however, were the real winners. The Sapphire Binder token earned me something that was genuinely new and unique, a rare grade artifact called the Gauntlet of Fist-Shaped Problems, designed to be equipped to any summoned minion. Although my taxidermid horrors were powered by relics and could wield artifact-based weapons, I'd never seen an artifact specifically created for summoned creatures before. The gauntlet was a hulking glove of pitted black steel, easily twice the size of my head with huge spikes extending from the knuckles. Once equipped to a summoned creature, the gauntlet tripled the summoning duration and increased all unarmed damage by 250%. It also came with a limited used spell called Knuckle Knockback, which could be activated by the minion 3 times per day. When triggered, Knuckle Knockback unleashed a thunderclap of raw power, capable of hurling an opponent back by 10 feet, while simultaneously dealing 50 points of internal bleeding damage. Drumball seemed like the obvious candidate for the gauntlet, since Cynthia didn't technically have hands, just a chainsaw and an oversized crab claw. I summoned the hulking mountain meat, then shoved the glove onto his single remaining hand, taken from the corpse of a hotel lodger. The gauntlet morphed as it slid over his fist, growing and changing until it truly fit like a glove. Drumbo stared down at the item, opening and closing his hand, then flexing his fingers. A glint of intelligence seemed to burn in his inhuman eyes, and I got the sense that Drumbo was excited, maybe. I couldn't really think of a better word. "Soon, pal," I said, tapping the whore around the forearm before banishing him back into his subspace storage locker. Last but not least was the Ruby Slayer token, which earned me a new Fable-grade sigil stone, which was a pale iva recovered in hair-fine golden cracks. Bone Break Ripple could be attached to any blunt weapon artifact with an open effect slot. When that weapon fractured a bone, there was an automatic 33% chance that the break would ripple outward, fracturing a connecting bone in the process. And when that second bone broke, yep, there was a 33% chance another ripple would proc, potentially snapping bone after bone after bone, in a cascading chain reaction. Although not quite as powerful as Gavel of Get Fucked, the ability seemed custom-made for my hammer, especially when paired with my shiny new Domino Rally title. While the others finished their own business inside the dusty corpse of the former Loot Arcade, I took the liberty of pulling up my blanket fort interface. At 3,200 square feet, the room was larger than I'd initially expected, and a full 1,000 square feet bigger than the spin cycle. But it wasn't like I didn't have the space. I could claim an additional 2,500 square feet worth of backrooms real estate for each variant assimilation level 1 unlocked. At level 35, even after all the space I'd already claimed, I currently had just a hair over 70,000 square feet of available space left to play with. That was enormous. More room than I even knew what to do with. Once I'd ushered everyone back into the hall, I selected the entire room, then sliced it out of existence with the precision of a scalpel. You've selected 3,200 square feet of eligible pro-generated material resource space. Would you like to use Corvo's blanket fort to convert the selected material into a personal superspace dwelling? You will have 66,897 available square feet remaining at your current variant assimilation level. Proceed yes/no? As I hit yes, and the room vanished, gone as though it had never been there at all. I thought Ed's jaw might legitimately hit the ground. "That is one hell of a neat trick," he grunted in awe. Chapter 48. We continued to follow the barren concrete hallway which lazily zigzagged back and forth, though it never branched or split. With the community radio station fixed firmly in mind, I cast unerring arrow more than once to make sure we were headed in the right direction. Each time, though, the blue beam ushered us deeper into the underground complex. There were no rooms, no windows, doors, exit signs, or even a single dweller in sight. And because the fallout tunnel was a vestigial remnant, it was blessedly free of spores, so we didn't even need to bother with the gas masks. The mood was tense, and everyone was quiet, except for Croc, who prattled on endlessly to Ed about water slides and all the water parks we planned to visit. Dan says he has been to a water park, you know? But on the outside. Dan's the coolest, don't you think? He's done so many amazing things. He even told me about a place called Disneyland that has a full water park but also has a bunch of different roller coasters, which are basically just really big slides if you think about it. The mimic sighed with longing. I dream about it sometimes, you know. Honestly, I can't wait. We went on the big slide inside the Jungle Gym Jamboree, which was just the best, but in the water levels, there are slides like that everywhere. And instead of dumping you into a ball pit or a vat of acid, you splash right into a big pool filled with water. There are some slides where you sit on these rubber dinghies, and then whoosh, right down a tube you go. And no one's trying to chop your head off or eat you. Croc's tail wagged energetically as it talked. Jacob was telling me about this slide down on the 119th floor called the Kraken Blaster. Sounds terrifying, but in a fun way. Like, oh no, I might die. But then you don't die, and you're laughing by the end. Brilliant. So excited. I've even been working on transforming into a rubber raft. Do you want to see? It's pretty good. Even better than my chair impersonation. Ed, bless his heart, did his best to seem interested. After almost 3 hours of steady trekking, The hallway finally came to an end, this time at another emergency exit door, labeled WBSC, Sunnyside Community Broadcast Station. "Gotta be honest," Ed said, his voice uncharacteristically soft as he eyeballed the door, as though it might be a mimic in disguise. "I never actually thought I'd make it this far. I kept working on Big Bertha because I needed something to live for after everyone else died. But deep down?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Deep down I always thought it was a fool's errand. Just a way to keep myself moving, keep myself sane, why no." He turned toward me, the lines on his face deeper than I'd ever noticed before. "No matter what happens, Dan, you and your friends have my deepest thanks for helping me get this far. It means more than I can say. Now fingers crossed that this actually works." Ed unceremoniously shouldered his way into the radio station. The door wasn't even locked. Eerie red light coated everything, but the first thing that really hit me was the smell, coppery, wet, and rancid. Thanks to my time in the back rooms, I'd become uncomfortably familiar with the scent of blood, but this was more than that. This was blood, but wrong. Cancerous and infected. If I had to guess, I'd say this was the essence of blight. The dim, flicking red light cast faint shadows, making the walls glisten as though they were covered in sweat. But it wasn't sweat. Rather, it seemed to be some sort of mucous membrane. Enormous, curved pillars that looked for all the world like giant ribs, lined the walls. For a moment, I felt like Pinocchio trapped inside the belly of the enormous whale, Monastero. Just like back at the preschool, the floor beneath my boots was spongy and unsettlingly squishy. Each step sent ripples through the fleshy surface, and the building groaned, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the basement. Tangled wires dangled like veins, dripping thick fluid that pooled in glimmering puddles. Shelves that might have once held tapes and radio equipment were now fused into the living walls, the wood and metal warped and assimilated into the sinewy surface. In one corner, an old broadcasting console sat half swallowed by the floor, its dials and knobs encrusted with dried blood stains. There was a rickety metal staircase on the far side of the room that connected to the floor above, but the basement itself appeared to be abandoned. Interestingly, though, when I consulted my mini-map it gave me a strange reading. The entire thing was a red triangle. Every square inch of it. I couldn't make sense of it, especially because there was no immediate threat in sight. No sunny-sitters preparing an ambush or swarmlings hiding in the rafters, waiting to rattle down on top of our heads like special forces, Nightmare Edition. "Jacob, temp," I whispered, "post up near the staircase. Make sure nothing interrupts us." I propped open the door leading back to the underground hallway we'd come through. "Croc," I said, directing my gaze at the rubbery blue dog. "Keep this door open. I want a way out if something goes wrong. If this turned into a shit show, we could always backtrack into the tunnel, bar the door from the other side, just like I'd done with Mr. Wiggles, then hoof it back toward the preschool. You can count on me, Dan. I'm solid like a rock and I never let anyone down." "Well, except all the Delvers who died," the mimic amended. "But that mostly wasn't my fault." "As always," I said to the mimic, "you're a wellspring of confidence and reassurance." The dog beamed, not realizing I'd meant for the remark to be sarcastic. I turned back to Ed, who'd finally removed the disruptor from his storage space. It now sat in the middle of the basement, the spongy floor bowing slightly from the weight of the bulky contraption. "So this thing is really gonna to stop the signal and take the hoa down for good?" I asked, studying the enormous machine with no small amount of doubt. "In theory," Ed said, not looking up as his hands continued their frenzied work, toggling switches, checking wires, and pressing an almost absurd assortment of buttons. "Think of it like a giant organic EMP. First, it'll jam the signal by broadcasting our message loud and clear. That should take care of the sunny-sitters. All of them, all at once." "Even the elites?" I asked. "Even the elites," Ed confirmed with a nod. "Then, once the sequence is finished running, it'll fry the nexus and prevent the signal from ever coming back online." He paused and glanced at me from the corner of his eye. We're gonna give this place a goddamn lobotomy. Enough for me, I said, squatting down besides the man. So what are we waiting for? Let's flip the switch, get the fuck out of Dodge, and call it a day. Ed grimaced. Yeah, about that, he said, faltering for a moment. Afraid it might not be quite as simple as I made it out to be, Kemo-sab. What the hell do you mean it isn't as simple as you made it out to be? I asked, doing a crudely impression of his twangy drawl. Back at the bunker you made it sound real easy. That's because if I'd told you the truth, Ed said, I was afraid you wouldn't help me. Are you fucking with me right now? I asked, pinching the bridge of my nose. Please, tell me you're just fucking with me. Afraid not, he said, still working furiously at the machine, cranking knobs, adjusting wires, tweaking dials and input settings. But we're in too deep to stop now. He jammed another wire into place. If you want to kick my ass later, fine. I'll pencil it into my schedule. He gestured toward a pile of sharpened metal rods, each about as long as my forearm, connected to the machine by a tangled mess of coiled rubber tubes. For now, though, I need you to take those conductor spikes and stab them into the ground. Deep. And make sure they're evenly spaced, we don't need any of them shorting out. I glared at him, barely able to contain my anger. Ed pretended not to notice. Come on, don't drag your feet now, he said. The quicker we get this started, the better. The full run sequence takes the better part of half an hour, and trust me, we don't want to be standing around when the hoe starts figuring out what we're up to. The better part of half an hour. I growled, staring daggers at him. If we weren't deep behind enemy lines, I would have punched him right in the mouth. Are you kidding me? Flip a switch, the signal goes down. That's what you said. I believe I already covered the part where I lied, Ed replied flatly. You really think the heavy mind governing the hoe is just going to let us sit down here for a cool 30 while you mess around with the signal that governs their entire society? I asked, not bothering to mask my anger. It's going to send sunny sitters after us, Ed. A whole shitload of them. We should be fine, Ed said, dismissing my concerns. Like I already told you, once the sequence starts, the signal will go down. That means it won't be able to mobilize any sunny sitters against us. He paused, glancing up briefly. Now, it might have some other defensive mechanisms tucked away, but nothing you and your friends can't handle. Just buy me the time I need, okay? This process is complicated and unfortunately it isn't automated. Then he gestured toward the pile of metal rods. And help me with the goddamn conductor stakes, will you? Less whining, more stabbing. This is such utter bullshit, I mumbled, before summoning Cynthia and Drumbo for a little backup. Temp, Jacob, just a heads up. This might take a little longer than we initially planned on. Someone, I openly glared at Ed, might not have been entirely forthcoming about how this process works and we might have some visitors before long, so just hold down the fort as best you can. Cynthia and Drumbo trundled over to the staircase, while I busied myself with Ed's stupid conductor rods. I hefted the first one and stretched it out, away from the disruptor until the rubber tube was mostly unfurled. Then, for the first time in ages, I used my hammer for its intended purpose and drove the first stake into the floor. The ground began to burble and gush, sticky black goop spurting up as the building quivered and shook like an angry dog waking up from a long nap. Uh-oh. That didn't seem like a good thing. I pounded in the last 3 spikes in quick succession, and each time the building groaned in protest, the foundation trembling and shaking more violently than before. Once all 4 stakes were firmly in place, I helped Ed prime the disruptor itself, throwing a few extra switches then channeling a thread of mana into a huge bank of CG-ascribed batteries. The disruptor buzzed angrily, colorful lights blinking on and off while bright strands of purple electricity arsed back and forth between a series of antennas protruding from the top of the machine. A palpable energy had begun to build. It was the same energy that filled the air right before a lightning storm. This is for Rick, Ed grumbled under his breath. For Michael. For Priya. For Aaron, Laura, Asha, and Ella. For all the friends who couldn't live to see this because you fucking took them from me. Karam's real son of a bitch. He yanked an oversized lever and arcs of brilliant power surged downward, flowing from the disruptor, through the spikes I'd driven into the ground, and directly into the foundation of the radio station. A second later, all of the ancient equipment embedded into basement walls screeched to life, accompanied by a blaring rendition of Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall. The funky beat and thumping bass line erupted from everywhere all at once, and as it did the ground swayed violently as the building moved. This wasn't like before, though. Not some minor tremor of annoyance. The entire radio station shot straight up into the air, then tilted precariously on its side. "Dan, help!" Croc shouted just seconds before the building lurched sharply, and the mimic tumbled through the open door. The hallway was gone, replaced by a dark stretch of suburban roadway sprawling out far below. What in the hell was happening? I found myself wondering. But before I could get any sort of answer, Ed slammed into my side like a sack of bricks, and the pair of us went sliding and rolling in a tangle of limbs. Woodstock squawked madly as I scrambled to stop our fall, but everything was happening too fast, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do. My fingers clawed for purchase, but the slick mucus coating the ground made it impossible. Before I could latch onto anything solid, we plunged through the open door, tumbling into the night just like Croc had moments earlier. Darkness had settled over the entirety of Sunnyside, and hanging in the sky like a huge bloody eye was the moon. A ball of bleeding crimson. We were 2, maybe 3 stories up, and while I was fairly certain a fall from this height wouldn't kill me, it definitely wouldn't be a pleasant experience. Worse, a not-so-small army of Sunny-sitters had gathered below, waiting with huge eyes, slack mouths, and upraised arms. The illusions masking their inhumanity was gone, banished by Pink Floyd, and all that remained was a sea of monsters. Acting on instinct, I triggered neural slipstream, and time stretched and slowed as my body melted away and I became a being of pure, ethereal thought. Since I was no longer physical, Ed's flailing limbs quickly separated from my own as the man plummeted toward the ground. I could make out Croc's blue form, already down on the asphalt. My heart leaped into my throat and tendrils of icy fear raced through my veins. Croc's rear legs were twisted at an unnatural angle and the dog wasn't moving. A swarm of adult Sunny-sitters had encircled the mimic's body, though they hadn't started actively attacking yet. They seemed to be confused and disoriented by the sound of the music, just as Ed had promised. That was one piece of good news, at least. Ed and I continued to careen downward, but for me it all happened in slow motion. Knowing that I had the time and that the impact wouldn't hurt me in my ethereal form, I pirouetted gracefully in the air, turning and flipping to get a better look at the radio station behind us. Except it wasn't really behind us anymore at all. Now it towered above us. Suddenly, the pure red triangle I'd seen before on my mini-map made sense. Everything had been red because we'd been inside the radio station, and the radio station itself was a living creature. The HOA wasn't some nebulous force or some secretive governing body, it was a single massive dweller. A floor boss. A blighted kidja made of meat and houses. And we'd just woken it up. Chapter 49. As I fell, temporarily stranded in slow motion, I stared up at the monstrosity and my brain scrambled to make sense of what exactly I was seeing. The dweller was huge, looming 3 or maybe even 4 stories tall, its shadow stretching long over the houses spread out on the street below. It was as if someone had sculpted the colossus from the remnants of every house in the neighborhood, a grotesque patchwork of flesh and meat, the shapes of suburban homes protruding haphazardly from its writhing mass like tumors. Shingles made of cartilage, window frames of bone, and walls that pulsed as though they had hearts buried within them. Its blocky head towered above the grotesque structure, a malformed mass of lumpy meat and gray stone with a single enormous eye that seemed to swallow the whole world. It stared down at me, unblinking, unrelenting, its pupil like a bottomless pit. Below its eye stretched a massive, jagged gash of a mouth, wide enough to swallow a car. A massive twisted steel protruded from the top of its distorted skull, rising into the sky like a twisted crown. The radio tower, in all its rusted glory. The source of the signal and the true power of the HOA. The tower hummed, sparking faintly with arcs of blue-white electricity, and I was certain I could hear garbled voices, carried on a distant breeze. Mostly, though, I heard Pink Floyd, blaring so loud it drowned out every other sound. It was a roaring bomb blast of thumping snare and ringing hi-hats, the bass line a slow march, while the guitar cut through the haze, sharp and rebellious. I couldn't think of a better song, considering the situation. Dweller 0.241055A, the HOA, Home Overlord Association, blighted, level 55. The HOA isn't just a boss. It's a system. A tyranny. A reminder that the true horrors of life aren't found in dungeons or darkness, they're found in the fine print of the beige-painted abyss. The HOA is every unspoken rule, every passive-aggressive note, every soul-crushing meeting where hope goes to die. It's apathy. It's the monotony of your life weaponized, and physically embodied as a shambling, 3-story tall architectural monstrosity cobbled together from suburban houses and the corpses of its unfortunate members. As in real life, the HOA doesn't just dominate the neighborhood, it rules it with an iron fist. It broadcasts an all-encompassing psychic order of authoritarian micromanagement that forces lesser creatures, infected by its spores, to fall in line. You'll try to resist, of course. Everyone does it first. But the HOA is insidious. Eventually you will comply. Coerced through exhaustion and sheer convenience. Just follow the rules, so you can get through this, you'll find yourself thinking. It's easier if you just obey. And then, one day, you'll look in the mirror and realize you've become part of it, a cog in its perfect, sterile, despair-filled machine. And if you dare to break any of its unwritten rules, the HOA will know. And it will judge. Oh, how it will judge. Remember, Sunny Sitters, trust the HOA. Obey the HOA. We are always watching. Always listening. The signal never sleeps. The HOA description was immediately followed by a second prompt. One that left a cold chill of impending doom running along my spine. Research achievement unlocked. Poke the bear. Hey, what's that? If it isn't the consequences of your own actions. You poked the sleeping bear just a little too hard, and now you've finally woken it up. If only there was some sort of folksy wisdom about not doing stuff like that. Oh, well. You're officially in the find-out stage, and this particular bear is really mean and 3 stories tall. Good luck. Reward: I'm not going to reward this kind of raw stupidity. 2x HOA citation. Very bad things are about to happen to you. Holy shit, are we fucked? I thought as I dismissed the prompts and turned away from the creature, refocusing on the approaching ground. This thing wasn't just a regular, run-of-the-mill overseer. Hell, this thing wasn't even like Funtime Frank, Lord of the Jungle Jamboree. This creature was a minor deity ripped from the pages of myth and legend. Not only was it enormous, it was level 55 and blighted. Even with all the new levels I'd gained, I wasn't even in the same league as this monster. Not even close. There was no conceivable way we could beat the HOA. It was too big. Impossibly powerful. What we needed to do was turn around and retreat for the store as fast as our feet would carry us, except we couldn't do that, either. Croc was lying on the asphalt, 20 feet below. Ed and I were simultaneously careening toward a similar fate, while Jacob and Temp were inside the torso of the monstrous creature with the disruptor, which was the only thing keeping the rest of the Sunny Sitters from tearing us limb from limb. To complicate things further, the disruptor needed someone to man it or the entire thing would shut down and stop working. Every option was bad. Knowing that, I began to cobble together a rough plan. I had seconds left before neural slipstream ended, and I needed to make every single one of them count. First, I pulled out the green plastic parachute figurine I'd picked up from the derelict loot arcade. The one-time use artifact would let whoever used it negate fall damage. As a non-corporeal spectral thought, I didn't need to personally worry about falling, since I was resistant to all forms of damage, but had had no such protections. I could always try to block the Delver from the air using telekinesis, but I didn't want to risk something going wrong, plus I needed to get to Croc. The Mimic was my #1 priority. So, I pulled my arm back and fastballed the green parachute man right at Ed, hoping he was smart enough to put two and two together. Then, I put Ed from my mind, angled my body, and propelled myself toward Croc like a human cannonball using psychic sovereignty. Moving at 6 times normal speed, I closed the distance in the span of an eye blink and slammed unceremoniously into the ground, landing in a crouch. I turned and rushed to Croc's side just as neural slipstream lapsed, and the world lurched back into normal speed. Up above, there was a sudden whoosh of movement, and I caught sight of Ed floating to the ground on a ghostly green parachute while the Hoakiju continued to rage. I ignored both Ed and the colossal monstrosity, focusing on Croc instead. Its hind legs were twisted and mangled, but Croc's health bar was still above a quarter and the dog's chest was rising and falling in a steady pattern. Thank the good Lord for small miracles. A group of listless sunny-sitters were drawing closer to us, and I needed a little more time. They were probably more or less harmless, since the signal was jammed, but I didn't want to take any risks. I pulled free my super slammer of shielding and dropped it against the asphalt with a muttered, "Let's pog." A golden bird cage of pure energy encircled us, insulating us against the encroaching sunny-sitters. In theory, the metaphysical barrier would protect us from most forms of physical, arcane, or elemental attack, though I doubted it would do much good against the Hoa, if it decided to take any direct action against us. It was better than nothing, however, and Croc was injured enough that I wasn't sure spell cards alone would do the trick. I pulled a greater healing Zima from storage, popped the cap with one thumb, then forced the bottle between the dog's lips. It only took a few seconds before Croc's eyes shot open and a ragged gasp escaped from its mouth. The mimic's body shuddered and convulsed as its legs twisted and popped back into proper alignment. The sound was nauseating, but the halting, hopeful flutter of Croc's tail made it all worthwhile. "Oh fiddlesticks," the dog said groggily, slowly gaining its feet as it shook its head. "Did anyone get the license plate on that bus that sideswiped me? I think that's how the saying goes, right Dan? I've never seen a bus in real life, but I've read about them. Even saw a picture in a book once." "You nailed it, bud," I replied, feeling a tense knot loosen inside my chest. So long as Croc was okay, then everything would be okay. "How are you feeling?" I asked seriously, trying my best to ignore the chaos and carnage unfolding all around us. It was tough to do. Without guidance from the signal, the sunny-sitters were losing their collective shit and several knockdown, drag-out brawls had already erupted all across the street and adjacent lawns. Ed and Woodstock had landed amongst the chaos, and the Delver was busy battling his way clear of a pair of Cathys who'd cornered him near a garage. "Just another day in the backrooms, Dan," Croc said weakly. "This is just a scratch, honest. I'm pretty sure Pony Puff's done worse to me, and I'm good as new now." The dog waggled its bottom to showcase the functionality of its rear legs. But the dog's cheerful wiggles quickly subsided as it stole a look at the rampaging Hoakiju. The creature didn't seem to be targeting anyone in particular. Instead, was shaking its whole body and smashing through houses with reckless abandon, stomping anything unlucky enough to be stuck underfoot. "What's it doing, Dan?" Croc asked, sounding confused. "I'm pretty sure it's trying to dislodge Big Bertha," I replied. "That and get rid of our friends. Ed told me the disruptor will shut the Pulse Nexus down for good, but that it'll take some time. 20 minutes, at least. Could be as long as half an hour. Problem is, we need someone up there to operate Ed's stupid machine, and the only one who knows how it works is Ed, who is down here with us." I froze as an idea suddenly occurred to me. I pulled out my etheric walkie-talkie, and thumbed the button, praying this would work, which was in no way certain, considering how much radio interference there was. "Temp, Jacob, come in over. How are you guys doing in there?" I sent, my voice filled with unspoken desperation. There was a long, silent pause and for a moment I feared the worst. Then the radio crackled, and Jacob answered, "We are alive but dealing with a few issues at the moment. The creature seems hell-bent on voiding us from its bowels and it's dispatched some strange sort of dwellers to handle us. Pasty white creatures called zoning leukocytes, effectively, giant white blood cells. They are quite numerous, though Temperance's disease abilities seem especially effective. Copy that, I sent, my mind whirling. I pursed my lips into a thin line. Hang tight for as long as you can. I've got an idea, but I need a few minutes to get set up. What are we going to do, Dan? Croc asked, and I could feel the panic underlying the words. On some level, Croc believed this was the end for us, and it wasn't hard to understand why. Croc had lived a long time and had seen hundreds of delvers come and go over the years. Though the mimic tried to stay positive and upbeat, the truth was, almost all those delvers had died in a variety of genuinely horrifying ways. Croc had finally found people who cared, and now the mimic was on the verge of losing all of us. Of losing everything we'd worked so hard to build. There was no way we could beat this thing. Not a chance in hell. It was just too big, too powerful. But maybe we didn't need to. If Ed was right, we just needed to buy enough time for the disruptor to do its work and fry the Hoa. The fact that Ed was down here and not up with the disruptor was a wrinkle, was one way to put it. Giant nightmare pain in the ass was another. Getting back inside the monster would be tricky, maybe even impossible, but thanks to the magic of the walkies, it was possible that Ed could talk Jack up through the disruptor's run sequence. Just like ground control guiding a passenger through the process of landing a plane. Jacob was smart, so I was sure he could figure it out, assuming that Temperance and my two taxidermid horrors could keep the zoning leukocytes at bay. That could prove to be tricky, but there was a way we might be able to help on that front. We needed the Hoa spending all of its attention on us and not the delvers screwing around inside its belly. We needed to make ourselves into the bigger threat. And as that idea clicked into place, I knew exactly what we needed to do. Do you know how to drive, Croc? I asked the dog, feeling the faintest flicker of hope. What, like the golf carts? Croc asked, cocking one ear in curiosity. Because I did spend a little time playing with the golf cart. Similar, but bigger, I said, nodding. I mean, I understand it in principle, sure, Croc replied, sounding uncertain. But to be perfectly, 100% clear, I've never actually done it. Like on my own. It probably isn't that hard, though, right? It's the attitude, I said, patting the dog on the back. I glanced up at the bloody red moon hanging huge and ominous above us. Having Croc drive was a terrible idea, but for my plan to work there was no other way. Ed was going to have to relay instructions about working the disruptor to Jacob, and there was no way he could do that racing through the hostile suburbs. As for me, I couldn't be behind the wheel, because I was going to be busy serving as the distraction. This was a terrible idea. Easily one of the worst I'd ever had. Given the circumstances, however, it was also the only plan that had even a hope of working. Resolved, I reluctantly summoned my newest taxidermid horror. Tope continued,